Namo tassa bhagavato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. Suddenly got all fuzzy in here. Let's see if we can, there we go. So this evening, thought maybe we could continue to look as we have at Anatta, this Buddhist concept that is, it immediately draws us into the uncomfortable world of what the heck is this? Yeah. What am I supposed to be doing with this? What does this mean? What are the implications? Either it's obvious, like, oh, of course I don't believe in a self. Or it's totally not obvious. Or I think I believe in a self. How would I know? We find ourselves always having to kind of grapple with this. This is one of the core teachings, the core characteristics of phenomena that the Buddha points to over and over again. Not necessarily to help us get our feet in the door. You know, he doesn't lead with anatta. Yeah, but once we are settled, once we are what he called a seika or a trainee, then what are we training in? Well, we're training to see things as they are. Well, to do that, we have to see their inherent characteristics, and the fact that they are not ourself is one of them. If we didn't have this notion of a self, there would be no need to do this. It's like when we try to pick up any skill, and am I cutting in and out? Yeah, well, we'll see how it turns out in the end. I am also not in control of Wi-Fi signals. If we didn't have the notion of self, there wouldn't be any reason to do this. Yeah. So it's precisely because we are what we are, people are what they are, there is ignorance that we are called to investigate. Yeah. It's not everybody must investigate not self. This is a particular thing that Seika do, that trainees do when they have undertaken the training to get out of suffering. This is the path of this training. This is the bread and butter of our investigation, is looking at this characteristic and the other two universal characteristics of anicca, impermanence, or dukkha, suffering. Yeah. So I thought, I was going through the day and asking myself, like, what is my experience of anatta, or what is specifically, because you can't have an experience of not self. What is my experience of having the self, which is more pertinent? Yeah, that's where the problem is, right? And that's what I ask of all of you. What is your experience of having a self right now? And that's this kind of, once we look into that, and once we kind of can almost put our finger in it, but again, we won't really be able to put our finger on it. We start to have a sense of why we even investigate, because it does feel like there's something there, right? I'm not just making that up. As we move about, as we do things, there's kind of this sense of, I exist because that hurt, because that was unpleasant, because they're annoying me. Therefore, ergo, I must exist to have that experience, right? And so we find again and again as we move through the world that it feels like there is this core of our experience. It feels like there is an us moving through the world. And this is, what is this experience we have? Yeah, as we're moving through, it seems to be there. So the really difficult thing about not self is that if we look at it, if we just take a snapshot of any particular moment of our experience, we tend to see an experience of us having a sense of self. So what it was, so how did the Buddha say there everything is not self if every single moment we're having this basic experience and it feels like I'm here though, right here, somewhere, somewhere. And when something happens to me, I like it or I don't like it. And this is it's actually not something that just instantly goes away, which is also kind of vexing. You know, you would think if the Buddha could point to it and then we would be like, oh, of course. And then suddenly we don't have that persistent feeling of, I think I'm here. I think I exist. If it would just go away suddenly, you'd be like, oh, you're right. I thought I existed, but actually I didn't exist. There's just this mass of interconnected pieces. Ha! Ha, ha. I get it now. I don't feel that pervasive, uneasy feeling of self. Then it would be great. We could just get to that place where we don't feel that sense of self, and then we'd be good. We would just learn how to hang out there and problem solved. Yeah. Wow. Great. Got rid of that. It was really in the way. It not at first, but once I noticed it, yeah, it just wouldn't go away. And I'm so glad it's gone now. But as it turns out, anybody who's a Seika will have this experience of this vague sort of mindfulness. There's something still there. And it doesn't matter if you've just started out, you've just got the notion of, I think my mind is crazy and I want to do something about it. Or you're like way down the path and you're like, yeah, I get these moments of great peace and serenity and samadhi. And then it goes away and things suck again. Why? This whole spectrum is the spectrum of a trainee. And throughout this whole spectrum, we will have this nagging little sense of self still following us. So it's not, none of, they're probably almost certainly, even during the Dhamma talk, you're not going to suddenly have an experience of not self. It's gone. It's finally gone. That nagging little sense is gone. Because that would mean you're now asika. Asika means you're not a trainee anymore. You are freed. You're an arahant. It's gone and it's completely gone. That's what we want to get to, but we've got to transition through all of these stages of it's still there, but what is it? It won't go away, but why? Because obviously this is not myself, and this is not myself, and that's not myself, and this keeps changing, and that keeps making me suffering. Why is this sense of self not dissipating? Well, this is what we're going to look at. Functionally, what is the sense of self, and where does it come from? How are we creating it? And that's more of how we get a sense of how we are diminishing the sense of self and how we chip away at it and break through it and dissolve it is not so much that it's like a light switch and we just turn off that sense of self. It's better now. But it's more about the grades of this experience and how we see them play out. Yeah? With a way we can really measure whether or not we're making any dent in this sense of self is how we act and how we speak. Yeah, because we can't just instantly change our views, can we? They're kind of stuck there by our attachments and the way that we've habitually looked at the world. But when we do start to let go of our views and we start to see, oh, I have this view, but now I have this view, it is kind of changing. Oh, views can change. They're not solid. They're not stable. Then we find ourselves transitioning through viewpoints. Oh, I can see it that way, but I can also see it this way. And I can kind of see it this way. The underlying tone goes from I'm so sure about this to I'm so not sure about this. I just don't want to get attached. Yeah. And this is the same experience we'll have as we start to investigate the nature of self and we start to see this characteristic in this part of our life and this part of our life and this part of our life, is gradually our actions and our speech will begin to change to reflect that we don't want to get caught, that we're trying to avoid to get caught on these things. There's still this lingering sense of self, but we don't want it to be in control. We don't want it to grab a hold of things. And so we start mitigating it. And we start, just getting away from the things that we're really strongly attached to. And we start hanging out in the places where we can just relax and not be attached. And this is part of our training and part of our development. Yeah, is that gradually we're going to start to see that whereas before we would have these moments, and so the Buddha, it's not, the world isn't just made up of trainees and those who are done with their training. There's this third category actually, and that's everybody else, right? You probably saw that coming. It's like there are people who are not training, who don't see a point to do any of this, who are, I wouldn't say that they're happy in samsara, but they don't realize they're not totally happy in samsara. And so they haven't yet undertaken this path of training. And the Buddha says about them is that the rigid ideas of self in the categories that he called the five aggregates. And they also do it in specific ways. And so the Buddha looked out in the world and he could create this kind of bracket. And maybe you've heard this before. He says, people of the world, they take form to be their self, or they take their self as possessed of form, or form as in self, or self as in form, or form as in self. He said they take their feeling to be self, or their self as possessed of feeling, or as a feeling, self is in their feeling, or feeling is in their self. They take perception to be themselves, or their self is possessed of feeling, as their self is self is in perception, or perception is in their self. They take mental formations as their self. They assume their self is possessed of mental formations. Say mental formation, their self is in more mental formations, or mental formations are in themselves. They take consciousness as themselves. They take consciousness as possessed of self. Their self is in consciousness, or the consciousness is in self. There, I did it. Yeah. And we've gone over these before, right? What a mess. How are we supposed to function? This is not functional, right? This is not, because this is not how we think, right? But the Buddha is pointing to something very specific. And this is one of the real curiosities of this, and why it really hasn't caught on in the same way that we have like a picture of the Buddha, and he has the aura and the glow and the robes and the lotus flowers. Wow, the lotus flowers have really caught on, huh? And there's all these aspects, and the statues and the stupas, and the way that we do the meal offering every day at the temple, and how we take the precepts and the refuges. There are things that have really caught on. But not self is this kind of thing that's really just relegated to people who are very serious about their practice. Because normal people, they don't go around saying, this is myself. No, I am my body. It's just not something we do, right? And people who do it, I am my body. I am my body. I am my body. Again, we have to look at how they act and how they speak to discern that this is actually their viewpoint. This is actually how they approach it. It changes. The reason the Buddha gives this bracket is not because every single person is going to have just one way that they view themselves, but that the self for a person of the world is no different from the sense of self that you have right now as a trainee. It's no different. They're avoiding the intense experience of identifying with stuff as much as they can. Yeah. So they don't go around thinking, this is myself, this is myself. And yet if they think they are their body, it's not that they're thinking, I am my body as they go down the street, but when something happens to their body, they think this thing has happened to me. When somebody is trying to do something to their body, they say they're trying to do something to me. And this is how they talk, and this is how they think, and this is how they act. It reflects their values, and it reflects their fears and their associations and what they carry with them as they go through the world. Yeah? And that's how it plays out. And so when you start to see that from a distance, then it starts to make sense, right? Now, then you start to be like, I don't want that. That seems terrible. Like it seems pretty harmless as just a mental exercise. But imagine you've been injured and you're being wheeled into the hospital. This is the last possible time and place that you want to believe that your body is yourself. You would take all the other 24 stations for self that you just don't want to believe that your body is self, because now your body is in imminent danger of all sorts of dangers and pains and things being pulled out and things being put in and all of that. Yeah? But this is precisely when we start to see this is dangerous. Yeah. And so the average person doesn't think they have this station of self, and yet it exists. How does it exist? It exists as an underlying tendency, right? And this is what we look for. And so when we take a big set of categories like this, the first method of investigation that we can apply is to look out into the world. Maybe we can remember a time before we ever heard about the Buddha's teachings when we actually engaged in these lines of thought. Yeah. Oh, when I was growing up, I'd look in the mirror and I'd be like, oh, I'm breaking out. And I look like a mess. People are going to think I'm not taking care of myself. And then like, wow, growing up, I did have a lot of anxiety about the way I looked and the way people related to me and about the things I felt when people said different things. Why? Underlying it all, it wasn't just simply stimulus response. There was a feeling that it was me that this was happening to, yeah? And that was coming out in different ways. And if we can think back in that way, that we can remember there's such danger in that line of thinking, because it just lines us up for suffering. When something happens to this thing that we're taking as self, it hurts. So this bracket is not simply just pointing fingers. They're like, oh, you think yourself is that, and you think yourself. Start looking. Start going through it as a list of like, well, what would that be like? And if we can't figure it out, then that's fine. Some of them are pretty odd. But the first way that we investigate not self is to actually start with the characteristic of self. And as we just looked at the Anatta Sutta. Yeah? So the Buddha points to the aspect of control and just showing us that, well, if this was ourself, then why is it we can't control or change it? Yeah, we can't say, may it be this way, may it not be that way. And so we could take any one of these and it's like, well, if that were the case, then wouldn't I stay with that experience? Wouldn't that experience be stable? Wouldn't I have some control over it? And how do we do that? It's simple. It's as simple as on and off. Yeah. If this is ourself, then it shouldn't go anywhere. Right? If this is a stable part of our existence, then it shouldn't be able to be taken away. The most obvious one is our body, right? People take form to be self. And But even if it's these other stations, they believe their self is possessed of form, or that their self is in form, or that form is in themselves. Nevertheless, the form should stay put, right? It shouldn't go anywhere. Well, ask Jim, where did his knees go? They're gone. And this is an experience that we've had all the time. Yeah, we get a haircut, our hair is gone. We looked at it just yesterday. We were looking at it in the mirror, and there was this sense of self. And now we look in the mirror, and there's still that the bald person. No, but why is that? A piece has been taken away. Yeah. And this is this, if it can be taken away, then it can't be self. And we can do this with, as an intellectual exercise. We don't have to actually just take off a finger and be like, ha, you're right. The finger wasn't me. It wasn't mine. It wasn't under my control. Look, it's there. It's on the table. It's not me. But we can do it as a mental exercise. Like it might seem weird. It's like, well, how can I imagine not having an arm? But then, yeah, do something, right? Open a car door without an arm. It's like, well, okay, I would use the other arm. Open a ketchup bottle, without it. Oh, they used to have ketchup bottles. Now I think they're more squeezy things, which you could even open with your chin if you needed. But as an intellectual exercise, if you can make a sandwich without that arm, then wow, it turns out it doesn't really affect a lot. Now, if you do end up losing an arm, or surgically having your knees swapped out for metal parts, or shaving your eyebrows, you do feel a sense of loss, right? There was this station for our sense of self that's not there anymore. And that's that lingering sense of self that we're chipping away at, that we're gradually getting over. But in terms of the physical reality, that thing's not there anymore. So we can see that obviously it's not a self. It couldn't be if it could disappear. And now we go through the other stations and we say, okay, if it can disappear, it can't be me. So we have something we really like. I might as well bring the pen in here. I really like the pen, right? But then the pen runs out of ink. How does that feeling change? It's not so useful anymore. It's just taking up space. And there's nothing worse than when you need to write something and you go into your desk and you pull out a pen and you go to write and it's out of ink. Yeah. So at some point, this pen that I really like, that is so useful, I begin to not like it. I would rather throw it out so that I don't accidentally pick it up in a time of need and try to write and can't write. Yeah. So that feeling of pleasantness suddenly went away. And then there's a feeling of unpleasantness that takes its place. Now, if our feelings, the things that we like and don't like, were ourself, then they couldn't go away. The things that we like would always be the things that we like. Now, maybe we can think back to when we were a kid. Do we like different things? Did that feeling of like go away? Oh, most certainly. I don't like action figures anymore. I don't like Legos. I really don't. They're overhyped. Did I at the time? Yes. Yeah, I just thought they were the coolest little thing. They were the essence of the ability to create. But now I don't. That feeling went away. If it could go away, then it's not self. But what are the things that we're attached to now? And this is in the present moment. This will feel solid. It will feel stable. It will feel reliable. Namely, it will feel like this is how I feel about this. But ask ourselves, could that feeling go away? Is there a scenario where that feeling could go away? Well, then it's not really us. Yeah. It's a feeling that's arising in the moment along with a sense of self. But it can't be ourself. It can't be reliable like that. So we have a family member, a dear one. We have a car that we really like, or we have a book that we really like, or we have a TV show that we really like. Could that feeling change? Well, if it could change, then maybe we don't. It's not as solid as we think it is. We have memories, right? Yeah, and some people believe that the memories are the essence of who they are. And as they can remember themselves, that is their definition of who they think they are. But can memories go away? And if you've ever had a surgery the way they do it now, and not with anesthesia where they just knock you out, but where they give you a drug that kind of erases your memory, then you've had a very wild experience of, wait, I was conscious and I was talking to you and you were doing things to me, but I can't remember any of that. Why? And you realize that you can actually have vast parts of your experience that you just can never remember. Yeah. And so if memory can go away, then it can't be you. And this is we usually, when we're of good faculties, we're quite attached to the fact that I am of good faculties and I can remember things. I can remember my address, I can remember my phone number, I can remember a whole of the different passwords that I need for all of the different websites to log into my bank and to get into my email and to do this and to do that. Somehow I remember all of these passwords. But if we can forget it, then it can't be us, it can't be ours. This faculty is not good. And as a funny experiment, if we wiped enough memories, there wouldn't be any feeling of loss, would there? Like if we just wiped some memories, like the how we log into our email, then we'd have some suffering. Yeah. Because we'd remember I used to be able to get into my email and people are probably trying to contact me with really important stuff that makes me feel important, but I can't read it. I can't get there. Well, then we would suffer. Right. But if we took away the memory, even that we had an email address, then actually we wouldn't suffer about not remembering the password. Maybe we would even still remember the password, but we just couldn't remember why it's important. Yeah, it's just garbage. Yeah, like the phone number of the house we had when we were growing up. I know people who still remember that very vividly. I remember how to order a pizza in Columbus, Ohio. I still remember the little jingle they had for their phone number, but I struggle to remember the phone that I've been using the last few years. Yeah. Why is that? Well, there's no suffering associated with it. There's memory, but there's not a memory of context. Again, with our habits, we've gone over this. If it can go away, then it's not us. Yeah. And I kid you, people of the world who will say, no, if you are that way, that is the way that you are. You can't change that. And from this perspective, as like a meditator, a Buddhist practitioner, it's like, I believe I can, if I'm angry now, I can get over anger. If I am prone to anger now, I can get over being prone to anger. Not because somebody told me, but because I have done it. I've experienced it, I've practiced it, and I have overcome anger. Yeah. I've won those battles and proved it to myself, and I have absolute faith and confidence. But when you meet somebody who's like, no, if you're an angry person, you're going to deal with this stigma for the rest of your life. Yeah. You're going to have to learn to be humble about the fact that you are an angry person. And like, oh, that's what it's like to believe that you are your sankharas. Yeah. That your sankharas are you, that they are essential part. They can't change, can't go away. You can't be free of them. You're stuck with them. Really? So you still think, you still think the other kids on the playground are icky and have cooties. You still think that that coffee tastes awful and bitter and nasty. You still think that this or that or this thing that you thought really strongly previously, and now you don't think really strongly. In fact, you probably think the exact opposite. This thing that you used to do all the time and now you don't do. These are people who've gotten over drinking, people who've gotten over smoking, people who've gotten over Facebook. We used to do it and now we don't. Yeah. We can stop a sankhara. Well, if it can go away, well, then it can't be us. And consciousness, I don't know what to say. We sleep every night, right? Well, what happens? One minute we're conscious and then the next minute we're not conscious. Yeah. What did the world stop for those 6, 7, 8 hours? No. No, it didn't. It kept going. You just weren't conscious for it. But if consciousness can cease, then it can't be self. And this is anatta. This is a functional way that we kind of investigate. Because well, I don't really understand it because this pervasive sense of self seems to follow me wherever I go. And so it must be in consciousness, right? Well, is that pervasive sense of self there when you're unconscious? It can't be if you're not conscious. You're dead to the world, and so you're not worried about what your sense of self is. Problem solved. Well, actually not, because you'll become conscious again and then it'll be back. So we do have to do the work of getting rid of it. But obviously, it's just to investigate, even though the sense of self kind of follows us around. Like we can look and it's not in consciousness, even though that would seem to be the most logical last place for it to reside. Consciousness is already arising and ceasing all of the time, and we're not in control of that. Just a poorly handled 2x4 catches us in the noggin, and suddenly it's gone. All of that wonderful consciousness that we're overflowing with and delighting in is now gone. And it'll hopefully come back, but there'll be a lot more, pain and swelling and changes in our form and our feeling and our memory after we come back to consciousness. Yeah. So this is the most simple way of investigating. Yeah. And it's an intellectual thing. Yeah. But it's an important and it's not going to fix the whole problem, this lingering sense of self, but it will begin to change our actions and our speech. We will be able to recognize that and see that. Yeah. It's like, oh, my hand hurts. And I know that it's just a hand. Yeah. It's not me. It's I'm not hurting. My hand hurts. Yeah, because a goat stepped on it. I don't know, because something happened to it. And we can see cause and effect, and suddenly we don't need to worry anymore. Like, of course my hand hurts. A goat stepped on it. It's not even really suffering anymore. It's just pain, right? And this is the functional effect. Our speech and our actions reflect that our view has changed, that there is no longer any strong belief in self. Now, we might still not know where this sense of self is, where it's lingering, where it's residing, but nevertheless, we know because we can see for ourselves through our speech and our actions that it's not residing there right now. Yeah, and maybe later, so somebody's backing out a car and we're in the way, and we're like, whoa, 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 stop! You almost hit me, and we're like, oh wow, did I said they almost hit me. Was I thinking in terms of self? Well, realistically, if you've been practicing and you've been investigating, probably not. It's probably not very strongly. It's probably residual, right? But you can look at that. You can say at some point, you'll be saying things like, whoa, whoa, you almost hit me, but you'll realize you won't be suffering over it. You won't be taking it seriously. You're like, yeah, they almost hit me, as opposed to, you almost hit me. That was a serious danger to my personal self. You should be ashamed of yourself. You should be more responsible, more careful, more mindful like me. Well, if we're really mindful, we're like, wow, there's a lot of suffering, a lot of possession, and a lot of self in those statements. But then somewhere down the line, we see a car backing up and we just stop what we're doing. We get away from them because we're like, they probably don't see us. And then because I have this every day, it's amazing how you can walk around in bright orange robes and people cannot see you and almost back into you all the time. But they do. And so you just become mindful and you're like, it's not me that's in danger, but this body can get run over. So let's keep it, out of the way of danger. Yeah. And suddenly you're taking actions, you're protecting yourself, you're being responsible, you're being but it's not coming from a place of self. And this is the transition that starts to happen. So these are just some thoughts, to take and look at, and to continue our experimenting, our investigation in this phenomena we call not self. Now we've gone over like seeing things change, and we've gone over how this sense of self causes us suffering. But there's one last thing I can leave you with, is that at the end of the day, if we're ever asking like, why am I doing this? What is this for? Am I getting anywhere? Then I would suggest that you seek out this sense of self, seek out this lingering aroma of attachment, of belief, of basically of ignorance. This, I must be here somewhere. It feels like I'm here. And ask ourselves, well, what does it feel like? What does that sense of self feel like? And this would be an investigation. I think if you look universally, 100% of the time, you're going to find that that sense of self feels unpleasant. And if you're really willing to put a label on it, that sense of self feels like suffering. As you're going through the day, you're like, I just feel like I'm here. Well, what does that feel like? Well, it feels like a tightness it feels like a heaviness. It feels like a solidness in my chest. Is that pleasant? No. And this is a simpler reality than maybe like, do I have a sense of self or not? Am I suffering or not? Yeah. And we'll find that when we can quickly shift our mind. Yeah, we're not in control of any of it. And so that's what I'll leave you with tonight. When something goes away, do you suffer? When something is here, do you suffer? We find that that's the simplest approach, is to just really check and like, wow, that this thing that I've been calling my sense of self is really just a tightness in my chest, is really just a sense of uneasiness, is really just a lingering unwillingness to face that, or that feeling, or that experience, or that person. And that when I give it its proper name and I say that you're not a sense of self, you're just tension, you're just stress, you're just anxiety. And it has its proper place, and it begins to be just like when we hurt our hand from a completely obvious cause and effect relationship. Like, oh, I am feeling this sense of tightness because of that. Yeah, therefore, it's not a sense of self. It's not a sense of me that I have to worry about and I have to strive to. It's just more of this suffering. This is why I practice, because I'm looking forward to a day when I am aseka, when I am done with my training, when I am yeah, I get my diploma and I get to say, it's like I don't suffer anymore. There's no tightness, there's no tension, there's no uneasiness, there's no anxiety. Yeah, because that would need a me for that experience to happen. And we're getting there. We're all getting there. Yeah, little by little. So keep at it. Keep investigating this. And if it's ever weird, if it ever seems pointless, then fine. Just set it aside. There's tons of good, useful things to be doing in Buddhist practice that don't have to be figuring out this not self business. But from time to time, um, put your mind in a new place and like really go for it. What would it be if that disappeared? What would it be if that went away? What would it be if I lost that? Would I still exist? Things would keep going, yeah. And this gives us something to work with. Well, then that's not me. And the moment we can say, well, then it's not me, it's as though it's already gone. Yeah. There's no attachment. So I leave you with these thoughts tonight. And we still have a few minutes if the internet permits, to just questions or comments or whatever.